a place where we collect stories and circulate life-changing wisdom. I am your host, Asher, and my co-host today is Queen Lab, and our guest today is Jen. And she is an amazing person already because we've been chatting so far, and she got the energy we need. And today's theme is around victory, and Jen get to share her victory with us today. And also, Lab, I got some questions for Lab. So she's been missing from this screen here for a long time. We're going to talk about some of her victories too that she's been having experience in Romania since she's left me, abandoned me here on this podcast by myself for the longest time. So, but with that said, Jen, if you don't mind telling us where you're hailing from, where you specialize in, who you add value to the world, and who you being a hero to.
Okay. I am Jen Canobbio. I am a licensed therapist in California. And about a year and a half ago, I expanded my practice into teen empowerment coaching.
Mm,
So I am trying to get on the other side of it to be more proactive to promote mental health rather than be in that reactive mode of just trying to help people heal.
mm, I like that. Now, if I had to ask you this question, like who are you being a hero to right now? What comes to mind for you? Who you being a hero to? What comes to mind if I ask you the question, who you being a hero to? What comes to mind?
Who am I being a hero to?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think of myself as a hero. So that's, I have to actually.
Put an S on it. So I'll say Shira then. Who you being a Shira to?
Absolutely. I don't know. I think in terms of who mine are, and actually my teenage daughter is
Mm-hmm.
mine, um, as well as my son. He's one of my heroes. But I very humbly would say that many of my clients would probably label that in their life at some point, right? I don't have a God complex. I am not looking to save anybody, right? I've just got a very specific toolbox. And I'm always honored when people invite me along for the journey to help
Mm-hmm.
them navigate and heal. But I know that many of my clients, even years later, will continue to reach out to me and let me know um, all the ways that their lives have changed since their work with me. So that's, and I think if you ask my daughter, she'd probably put me in that category too.
See, see, see,
Awesome.
see.
Well, hopefully you'll share with us some of your tools from your toolbox. But why don't we start with just tell us about your story, like the story that we started talking about when we were off cameras. I love it. So
Yeah, I sort of fell into working with young children when I was still in college. And I thought that's my passion. I love working
Mm,
with kids. I love kind of being of service, of help. I was raised by, kind of somebody who's very service minded, all about paying it forward. Um, and so nobody was really shocked when I fell into the field of social work, but I tripped into the world of trauma and specializing in people helping from heal from trauma, especially early abuse. So that was really the trajectory that my career has taken. And everybody would say, "Oh, you're going to burn out. Oh, you work too hard. Oh, you take
mm,
the hardest cases," right? But I never burned out. I actually found it very energizing to be able to have such a tremendous impact, right? It gives me some sense of purpose and service while having to figure out all that balance for personal self-care in my own world. But about 13 years ago, I lost a student that when I was contracting with a school district. I had just been referred a student that had returned from a non-public school where they had more intensive support. So they were just coming back to sort of that comprehensive traditional school campus. And at the time, the district was struggling with a suicide cluster. All of
mm,
these young adolescents were either actively killing themselves or actively trying. And it was a really traumatizing, horrific experience. And that very beautiful 18-year-old new client that had just transitioned back successfully died by suicide. And that was probably the biggest traumatic experience in my career. And the result of that was a whole lot of very well-intended people talking about how all of the stressors that our teens were dealing with was driving them to suicide. And I was sitting over here saying that that's actually not what it is. What I was seeing was a lack of foundation. There was a lack of social emotional skills. The academic curriculum was great at trying to prepare them for Ivy League. It was not great at preparing them for life. They did not have problem-solving skills. They did not have great communication skills. They did not have emotional regulation skills. They did not know how to take care of themselves or even understand everything that was happening to them. So I became at that point sort of a little self-appointed advocate, would get on my soapbox and preach and beg school districts and do my part to go in and try to provide this, but it felt very piecemeal. Things have, the pendulum has slowly been swinging, right? I know in California, money's been allocated and requiring school districts to provide, but we're years away from there being any real curriculum and shift in the public school system to provide these skills. So about a year and a half ago, I was like, forget it. I'm just going to stop talking about it and I'm just going to do it. So as somebody who doesn't like to be in the spotlight, that was one of my first victories in this, was to actually realize I'm not going to die when I put myself out there, because I know that doing so potentially saves lives. And who am I to not share my skills to try and help as many youth as possible? So I've always been in that kind of healing, reactive helper role. And I just needed to feel like I was doing something more proactive, because a lot of the traps that adolescents step in that will create traumatic experiences, will reinforce negative beliefs and poor self-care. And honestly, the adults that, while love them and are well-meaning, end up perpetuating all of the stereotypes, right? And we experience what we expect. So we're going to experience acting out pain in the butt youth if that's what we expect of them. And we're not actually equipping them with the tools to make healthier choices, because the adolescent brain is all about power and potential, right? There is so much that nature is doing to send them into adulthood successfully. But without the tools and the understanding, they end up stepping into all of these holes and not maximizing that power, and instead sort of using that potential for evil, not good. So I'm all about giving kids these tools so that they navigate, there's a lot of challenges. I don't promise this to make the teen years easy, but that they can navigate it more safely and healthy, without reinforcing all of the mental health issues, and set them up for a much more fulfilled and healthy adulthood. I will say, if you look at statistics, something like 40% of youth under the age between like 12 to 15 have a mental health diagnosis, right? Whether it's depression or anxiety. And I'll be honest, I've never met an adolescent that doesn't technically qualify if I were to go to the DSM, right? And look up through the diagnostic manual, even if it's just adjustment disorder, right? So we can either reinforce all of that, or we can give them the tools to move through it. And 70% of mental illness is diagnosable between the ages of 18 to 24. And if you look at adolescence, which is good 12 to 15 years, and divide it into thirds, that's the last third of adolescence. So it makes sense to look at those first 2/3 of adolescence as setting them up to reinforce all of those potential mental health issues.
I think there are a lot of parents who are listening to us right now, and I hope so. And I think what I would like to ask you in behalf of them is, what do you think they can do to give them a good foundation from home? Because they send their kids into society, school, all that, and they have no control over what's happening and who's influencing them and who's molding their way of thinking and understanding life. So what can parents do, I guess, first question, and what they should not do, if that makes sense?
Absolutely. I love that question. Thank you for asking it. To address what they can do, the number one thing that parents can do is maintain a healthy connection with their teen, because that is the biggest predictor of safety. The stronger the connection, the more those kids hear their parents' voice in their head, in the positive, right? Not in the what not to do. Because when we hear the what not to do, our brain is automatically looking at all the ways we're going to screw up, and we're more likely to go that direction, right? But when there's that positive, healthy connection, they're hearing that, right? And that really starts with learning effective communication. Lots of people think they're good communicators, but some people are better than others. But there are actual Skills, I break it down like a math problem. For people, like if you remember, right, order of operations matters. The same is true with communication. And so I teach that in my program with teens, but I also will teach it to parents and parent coaching, so that they're kind of practicing the same skills, they're speaking the same language. But that open communication, learning to be a good listener, is one of the best ways to maintain the connection. The what not to do, don't take your kids' behavior personally. Teens are naturally dysregulated. And every day I hear parents say, my teen is disrespectful. No, your teen is dysregulated. And when you react to that dysregulation, they feel disrespected. So they're mirroring that. We have the opportunity to actually mirror the regulation, right? To sort of help their system calm down.
Oh, I love what you said, but I have conflicting feelings because I
Okay.
come from, I'm Romanian, and in my culture we give the spanking and the tough love. So I want to understand how. So I picture myself. I don't have kids, but I picture myself with my teen being disrespectful.
Yeah.
Right now, how should I react? You know, because I feel like if I ignore or I come with a loving approach and understanding approach, I feel like maybe she feels that she's or he feels that they're entitled or allowed to have such behavior towards their parent.
Another great question. And a lot of times I think that there is that initial inclination of, who's in charge here, right? It isn't about the control though. If we want to hold the power, then we're not teaching our teens how to be empowered, right? So we're teaching them to be compliant or sneaky. We want to teach them how to make good choices, right? So all too often we end up parenting or reacting from these extremes, right? The big pendulum swings. We're either overly permissive or we're overly controlling, and parents will kind of swing back and forth. The reality is healthy exists somewhere in the middle, right? It's not like, ooh, here's the stagnant place. I have found it. I'm going to stay right here. It's more like being on that balance board. We're always shifting so that we don't fall on our ass. But we have to be able to make micro shifts. When we make the big swings, usually something really falls, and it's an extreme that isn't going to be helpful in the long run. But it's about both and. It's not about either or. I get to hold boundaries and I get to be understanding, right? When we can find that place, when we develop those strategies, our kids feel safe. Because one of the things parents totally miss during the teen years is our teens don't feel safe. They come across big and confident and boisterous and leave me alone. I got this, right? I've got 2 teens. Like I see this every day. I live this. I know, right? Especially my oldest. Favorite response is, I got this. Oh, okay. So it's learning how to parent not less, or not even softer, but just more effectively, because their needs in adolescence are very different than their needs as children or their needs as an adult. It seems like we're looking at them as they're mini adults, so they should be able to handle adult responsibilities, or we want to treat them like they're overgrown kids. Adolescence is its very specific developmental stage, separate from being a child, separate from adulthood. And when parents understand what is happening during adolescence, what that brain is trying to get them to do, but how it will kind of hijack things, parents can get it back on track. So if we understand that the adult brain on a healthy day, right, is taking in information from our prefrontal cortex where we can make rational, logical decisions, we can assess, we can problem solve and get creative, right? That's where we're trying to help our kids get to. But that prefrontal cortex isn't built out. It's like trying to build a second story on your house. The framework is there, but the insulation and the wiring is not in yet. So we're expecting them to communicate and to behave and make decisions from something that's not even fully built. So for the adolescent brain, it's from the bottom up, right? So what does that mean? That means that they're starting with basic instincts that we're all born with, right? Survival. And everything's going through the limbic system, the middle of the brain, which is also where our memory network is. That's where that social part of the brain is. So that's why it seems like, oh, friends suddenly are more important than me. No, it's not that they're more important, but that's sort of the first stop in the brain. And it also puts them on hyper alert. So they're interpreting about 90% of information and feedback and nonverbal cues from people as being in trouble, right? There's that threat response, fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, right? So that we also see how teens, especially teen girls, will inadvertently become people pleasers because that's a threat response. If I just make everybody happy with me, I'll be accepted, because being accepted is what means safety. We don't feel safe if we don't feel included, right? So, people talk about peer pressure. It's not really that our kids don't know how to make good choices, but if I'm with a group and that group is all doing something, it doesn't feel safe to be excluded, right? So it's about giving them the skills to still feel safe and make those healthy choices, rather than let, nature instinctively kick these things into gear. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
So when parents understand this, they can adjust their parenting strategies to set those boundaries. One of the first things that I tell parents is, rather than the list of don'ts, how about a family contract? Because kids are very much about justice, right? And trying to figure out and hold parents accountable too, because now parents are no longer these magical, heroes on a pedestal. They're just humans and don't know everything. So without being able to be on equal footing, I do want to know that my parents have to live by the same rules that I do. Okay, so let's do a family contract. How do we all want to live, rather than the what not to do? What are we all agreeing to? We want to live in a comfortable home environment. We want to be spoken to respectfully, right? We want people to make safe and healthy choices because our choices affect each other, right? So when we come at it from that place and our kids screw up, because they will, we get to come back and say, so what got in the way, right? We get to help them reflect. We get to make those learning moments. That's also the place where we get to set the boundaries. And when they're in a calm place, our kids need boundaries. They know they need boundaries. They may not always like them, but they know they need them. So they'll buy into them when they've been a part of that conversation, right? And then there's easier accountability when, again, they want to go and test those boundaries. But parents don't realize just how unsafe and unsteady teens feel in their life. And so when we hold that steadiness, we're creating that safety.
Okay. Well, sorry, Asher, go ahead.
I was being mesmerized by by Jen. She said earlier that, I'm a master listener, but you're a master speaker too, Jen. I was listening this whole time, like you are really good at explaining everything so awesome. So thank you so much for sharing that. And I was listening to you, I was deep down wondering, like, what's at the core of you? Why did you choose teens or the children versus adult in your practice?
In my therapy practice, I work really with all ages. And I think that I picked teens. I have thought about this. Why did I gravitate towards the tweens and the teens?
Hmm.
I think because they're the most misunderstood. I think that, everybody loves little kids and we see the benefit of starting young. But teens often really get that bad rap, right? They're a pain in the butt. They're dramatic, right? They're irrational. Well, there may be some truth, right? There's often truth in myths and stereotypes, but that's not the whole story. And when I look at my teen clients and some of the mistakes, some of those traps that end up, really creating a traumatic effect on them, and I realized, had they understood what was happening to them, had they had the tools proactively, they probably wouldn't have made that choice. They have a 12-year-old come into therapy and be acting out at home and the parents not understand, and then have the teen disclose to me, well, I liked this boy, and even though I said no for a while, I sent him a nude because he promised not to share it with anybody. And gosh, guess what went viral at school the next day? And then police are involved, and it's a whole thing. Had she had some tools, she probably wouldn't have found herself stepping into that trap. And I see this kind of stuff, right? Not understanding that social part of the brain and dealing with it by getting drunk at a party to manage social anxiety, and then finding themselves date raped. Somebody they thought they could trust. I see this stuff day in and day out, and a lot of it is avoidable. So I decided I'm going to try and head off some of this trauma. I am going to try and set them up, rather than the adults who come in and say, why didn't somebody teach me this stuff earlier? Why didn't I understand this? Well, because your parents didn't understand it. But when we know better, we do better, right? And now
You
we
mentioned
understand so much more about the adolescent brain, we get to do better.
You mentioned earlier about what hard cases, and I'm curious whether or not you like to pick a hard case. Maybe that's why you picked the one of the more challenging areas. Even though I mean I know the difference, how difficult it is to really do your work on older folks versus the teens or versus younger one. I don't know which one of those areas are the most difficult, most hard cases you can run into, but curious to know what your thoughts.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I I don't know that I've thought about it quite that way. Um, I think the things that make teens easier is the fact that all the wiring is not in place. So if you're
Mhm.
building a house, it's a whole lot easier as the wiring's going in to make those adjustments, to make it healthy and effective and like super fast than it is to go in and do the rewiring. And because their brains aren't fully wired yet, even if there's rewiring to be done, which is part of what I do in therapy, um, it happens a lot quicker. So I wouldn't say that it's harder to work with adults per se, but they have much longer storylines of reinforcing all of those traumatic and negative beliefs.
Mm.
So I just
It-
wanted to intervene earlier in one aspect of my career. Um, yeah. And the effect of trauma when left untreated are those really extreme cases of complex trauma, right? Like we used to be called multiple personality disorder. It's really dissociative identity disorder. And I did not set out, it's not that I really want to work with these hard cases, but I have an easier time connecting. It's almost, there was a movie back in the 90s, right? The Sixth Sense. I see
mm.
dead people. I don't see dead people. I see people's emotional wounds. And not in an intrusive way, not in a judgmental way, but when a client comes into my office, I get a really quick read for what's happening in their system. And I think that not all therapists do. But I did get the nickname early on in my career as the teen whisperer because I didn't, like I said, I started out with little kids, but I started getting all of my clinician friends, my colleagues sending me the teens because they were too difficult. I can't get through to them. They're so oppositional. They're so difficult. And I could just connect to them. And I realized it's because they feel seen, heard, and understood. And at the end of the day, as humans, we don't need people to agree with us. We don't need to have people tell us what we want to hear, but we feel safe when we feel seen, heard, and understood. And I could create that safety quite easily for them. So I got the nickname the Teen Whisperer.
Are you great at whispering into your children's ears? You told me they're both teens.
Yeah. I mean, I think overall, probably feel a lot more successful than a lot of parents because I do have a full toolbox. But there is a reason that as therapists, we don't serve our own family, right? I'm just more emotionally involved. I'm in the mix. I don't have that same perspective. I do think overall, I'm pretty good at catching myself falling into all the parenting traps and pulling myself out and trying to
Mm.
correct and connect. But I will say, I tell people I found mentors and coaches for my teens to reinforce all of my lessons because I know that that teenage brain is naturally seeking out more novel voices. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I've heard you. I know it. I know what you're going to say to me. You say this stuff because you're my mom. You say this stuff because you're a therapist, whatever. But when they hear it from a different frequency, from a different voice, it just reinforces everything that they've learned from me. So yeah, I am well aware that my kids need it too.
Mm.
You mentioned the parenting traps. Do you have anything that comes to your mind that you can share with us?
Yeah, I always say I am the queen. I am the only person that can win a power struggle. And it's because I know how to get myself out of them. And most people don't. So I'm really good at avoiding them. But every once in a while, being human, right? I have days where I'm not as mindful, or I'm just more easily triggered. I'm more tired and stressed. And my kid can kind of push a button. And next thing I know, it's like the thing where you put your fingers in, right? That Chinese trap, whatever it's like the harder you pull, the more you're stuck in it. But I am really good at recognizing what's happening and to be able to name it. I tell my clients, one of the best things you can do is learn to name it to tame it. And when I can see that that's what's happening, I can take that breath and go, okay, what's happening here is that I'm really tired and I reacted to you rather than actually listen to you. So I'm going to take a time out. I'm going to regroup and I'm going to come back and I'm going to try to really hear what you are asking for, right? Rather than just react to
So if we
it.
had a
Mhm.
if we had a transition into your new profession and new area of interest where you because I'm looking at your work into where it's like the therapy stuff is like the past present work and then the coaching is like the future present work. So now if you transition from into the future present area where you gotta find a way to get ahead of stuff and you gotta create visions and so forth for people or help them create the vision for their life, so forth and so on for the teens. Like how is that being rewarding for you so far?
That's a very interesting question. I mean, I think my rewards are in the small moments. I believe, right? I mean, it's like the theme is victories, right? I believe in finding the wins every day because they truly exist. And,
Hmm.
like I said, we experience what we expect. So if I expect to find a win every day, I'm going to feel good about my work and I'm going to be able to see the impact of my work and help my clients see all of their victories because sometimes they're not ginormous, right? We don't wait until, we're standing on that podium getting that gold medal, right? We get to see the daily wins because I did something better today than I did, last week, right? And so when I get messages from parents or from teens saying, you know what, that conversation that I was dreading, where I was expecting the 2-hour lecture, I I decided to trust you, and I took the order of operations to communicate with my mom, and that conversation that would have normally taken 2 hours took 2 minutes. That to me is a huge win, and that is that reinforcement that what I'm doing matters.
Hmm. Congratulations, Jen. The master listener, no, the master speaker. Telling the story like it is. We appreciate you sharing all that wisdom you've been gathering from hanging out with teens or
I
tweens. You know what? I don't know this. What is the difference between a teen and a tween, by the way? I'm curious. I heard that term twice now, and I'm wondering what that really means.
A tween means that you are an adolescent, but you are not officially a teenager. So basically, it's 9 to 11 or
Hmm?
10 to 12. You're officially a teenager at 13, right? But adolescence is starting younger and younger. And in many, it starts a little bit earlier in girls. So 9 and 10 is where girls are officially entering adolescence now.
Mm.
And it goes until about 24, 25. So, we think it's just 13 to 19, but adolescence really spans like a decade and a half. So by the time you're out of it, you've spent more of your life in adolescent than anything else, which is why it's such an important stage to understand so that we can maximize the benefits of it.
Mm. Tweens.
So, what is your work right now? Are you still focusing on one-on-one clients, or it's a group um, approach? How does your work look like right now? Sorry, guys.
So the goal is definitely group, right? Because I want to have as great an impact as possible. And there is something to be said for learning in that group setting, that collective energy. But up to this point, because this has all been a very big learning experience,
Mm.
uh, I realize, okay, I am getting adolescence from all three stages of this period. And I'm not going to put a 12-year-old in a group with an 18-year-old, right?
Mm.
The information is virtually the same, but the way it's delivered, the way it really matters in their life is going to be a little bit different. So, because I'm just kind of starting to really build the momentum, I am looking to transition into group, but up to now, it's really been one-to-one, which has been great because it's been allowing me to sort of refine that toolbox to say, oh, let me add more tools over here on this topic. And maybe I'm a little heavy with stuff we don't need on this topic over here, right? We can always add back to if we need to. So it's been good to refine, the components of the program. But I am looking to transition into more of the group work because I think that there is an added benefit to that.
Mm. So would it be safe to say if I say anybody listen to this right now? Like Jen hasn't cracked the code on the group thing yet, and maybe if you guys got great ideas of how this group thing can work for Jen in her specialty, then maybe you guys should reach out to Jen. And if you are a teen or a tween or close, let's say, adulthood piece of it. And Jen sounded like a hero, definitely. Reach out to Jen. So Jen, right now, if they're hearing you right now, like, oh, guess what, Jen, you are my hero. And I would love to work with you. How can they work with you?
They can find me at jencanobbiocoaching.com. They can find me on Instagram, same thing, Jen Canobbio Coaching. And I do have a Facebook group for parents because let's face it, a lot of teens, you'd be surprised actually. I will say parents are like, yeah, this sounds great. My teen will never agree to it. I've only, in all of the kids that I've worked with, I've only had one say no. Even the somewhat resistant ones, what parents underestimate is how much our kids really do want to feel strong and healthy and like themselves and feel confident about themselves. So they're way more agreeable to this than they would think. It's all about how you sell it to them, how you approach it. And when it's a have to from parents, of course, there's resistance because they're trying to feel like their own human.
Mm.
But I do have a group for parents because they're usually kind of the gatekeeper. And I do give them lots of free resources and strategies and tips. I do free trainings in there because they are at the front line with their teens and they are still the most important relationship. So that's on Facebook. It's called Proactive Parenting Secrets.
Anybody can join the group?
Yeah. I mean, I do ask, do you have a teen? Or one coming up, but yeah, if somebody wants to be there and they want to be I mean, I've had parents join who've got like a 5-year-old. I've had people who aren't a parent, but they're helping to support, their sister or brother raising their teen, or they're a caregiver. I've had a couple of teachers that work in middle schools, right? So I don't discriminate. If you have a desire to understand what adolescence is really all about and how we support our adolescents in becoming healthier humans and really changing how we look at adolescence, I'm more than happy to have people in the group.
Can you repeat the name of the group?
Yeah, Proactive Parenting Secrets.
Awesome.
Lav, are you trying to practice early? Is that what it is?
I definitely want to understand the
I
mind
want to
of
know what I'm getting
adolescence.
into, right? I do have people to join my group because they hear all the horror stories. And I believe, right, we talk about generational trauma. And like in my therapy program, in my therapy practice, right, parents always do better than their parents in one way or another. The intention is always good. But when we don't have the tools, there's only so much we can do to not perpetuate still those old wounds and how they show up in our life. I truly believe that intervening early and raising healthier generations is the solution to that generational trauma. So, trying to have that impact on mental health at a whole different level now. And I do see a lot of wins along the way. That's the exciting part.
Let me ask you this crazy question, by the way. Is there a possibility that you would stop loving what you do right now?
I've been doing this for 30 years. I highly doubt it.
What is the best part of your work?
Watching people find connection and safety in their life, and whatever that means for them.
What does that do for you?
Adds fuel to my tank, right? I do believe that as humans, we are hardwired to be part of a tribe or part of the collective. And I think we're hardwired to need to feel like we have something to share, to provide, to be of service. And this is it for me.
I'm listening. Like you said, you were a good listener. I'm trying to be a good listener too right now while you speak. And I recognize the power of community, of people like being in your space, cheering you on, uplifting you, telling you exactly what you sound like when you speak, or what you look like when you move. And sometimes we need those kind of people in our circle. And based on what you do, Jen, I'm looking so far. I'm like, well, I would wish I had a Jen in my life when I was younger, right? To kind of like
I
really.
had a Jen in my life when I was younger. I had mentors, right? I had people I looked up to. I had a good life. I am one of the few people as a trauma therapist that didn't get into it because of my own journey, right? I actually got into it because of all my blessings and my mom's role modeling, like I said, for paying it forward. And I sort of stumbled into trauma work. But when I look back at my teen years, as okay as they were, I wish that I had understood how I was perceiving things. I wish I had understood why I responded in the way that I did, because it would have been a whole lot more effective. I would have felt a lot more confident in myself a lot earlier in life, right? And to go back to the question before, right? What do I get out of this? One of the best ways for us to be healthy humans is to practice what we preach, right? So when I am working with my clients, whether it's in coaching or in therapy, I hear myself. It's my reminder to myself to use my own tools. So I do get from
You guys heard it.
it.
It's fuel in Jen tank to work with her, so you know she's gonna be invested in it because she's getting fuel from it.
Oh,
Okay.
Jen, I have one question. I loved how you presented the family contract, and I think it's a great idea to actually sit together and maybe build it together. But what would you suggest? What would be the repercussions of not respecting the contract? How do you hold your child accountable, or the parent for that matter?
Well, I think, having a contract like that isn't a one and done conversation, right? I think any good living contract has to grow with us because we're always growing as humans. So I think that families having ongoing discussions, whether that's just casually over dinner or whether it's regularly scheduled family meetings, right? It's how are things working? Are we needing to make adjustments? Are we needing to make additions? But when having those kind of conversations, it is important to talk about, well, what are the boundaries, right? What does it look like? I tell my kids, their voice matters. Their voice is equal to mine, but it's not a democracy. Ultimately, I'm still in charge because it's my job to provide the safety and the guardrails, right? So it's about hearing them. It's about listening. I mean, my son a couple years ago turned to me and said, "Do you ever say yes?" I'm like, "Of course I do." And he's like, "No, you might agree to things, but you never just say yes." And I walked away and I thought about it. And I went back to him a few minutes later and I said, "You know what? I really appreciate you bringing that to my attention. I realize that there's always this hesitancy because I want to protect you. And even if I'm like, yes, you can go out with your friends. Yes, you can stay the night. Yes, you can have this privilege. There is that initial hesitation on my part to want to protect you. And that's scary. So I don't initially say yes. But you know what? I can understand why you just need the wins. I understand why you need to hear the yes, right? So it's about having those discussions. It isn't about my way or the highway, because teens will surprise you when we actually listen to them. So a healthy boundary can be a flexible one, right? But it is about the accountability. So if we've agreed that we want to live a certain way, and this behavior over here was not in alignment with that, we start with a little bit of curiosity, right? Because again, when we feel seen, heard, and understood, we're much more likely to communicate effectively. We're much more likely to self-reflect. We're helping our kids learn these very important life skills, and we're still holding them accountable. So I'm not saying my kids have never lost privileges, and there's just no big shock because we've talked about the expectation and we've talked about, the positive consequences, you get more freedom. The negative consequence is you're going to earn back some of that trust, right? And it's knowing that it's not the end of the world. It's knowing that that safety net and predictability is there. Sometimes that's why kids test boundaries. How secure is it really? If I'm driving over a bridge that has guardrails, I don't stop and think about driving off into the bay. But if I were to suddenly drive across that bridge and those guardrails were gone, it would scare the hell out of me, right? The teens need to know that we have those guardrails in place. They have to see them. They have to know that if I bump up against them, they're going to be good and firm. And that's why teens are going to always test boundaries. But when we're very clear and consistent with them, while recognizing as they grow, there might be room for a little flexibility. That's that balance board. It's both aimed.
But when I heard you said, "Mom, did I ever get a yes from you?" I heard in my head, I heard your voice like, "Oh, it depends." Like, like, "Oh, it depends." Mom always give me a "it depends" answer. And I gotta negotiate, right? So,
But you know what? Negotiating are great skills. I tell my son all the time, as long as you use your skills for good, not evil, you're going to rule the world. Very strong-willed.
All right, Jen, we're gonna wrap up. I really enjoy listening to you and Lab chat it up a bit. Lab curiosity.
You having me. Thank you.
Yes.
Pleasured me.
So if you had to wrap up and give us your biggest takeaway or giveaway from this conversation, what would it be?
That there's a lot more advocacy and education to happen so that people really start to rethink what the teen years are all about. And that excites me. And we all can do our part as the teens are going through it. And as adults, again, even if we're not parents, we have teens somewhere in our life, or we will at some point. So the more we educate and understand and learn how to shift and challenge our perspectives to find those wins, the more we're going to help build them. And that really benefits everybody.
Any thoughts, Lab?
Yeah, I'm just overwhelmed now because I have another field that I want to research after we get off this Zoom call. And I will also reflect at my teen years because, because you said a lot of things. So I want to see if I can make a connection with my teen years. So thank you so much for sharing with us all your knowledge and experience.
I really appreciate being here. It was great to talk to both of you. Thank you.
You're not off the hook yet, Jen.
Okay.
I got one more question for you.
Okay.
What is that one thing or two thing when people do drive you crazy?
Invalidating emotions is my biggest trigger. Somebody who wants to just placate or talk over you. It's like, I don't need you to fix anything. I don't need you to make it better for me. I need you to understand. So that's a trigger for me. And I think probably why I'm really good at attuning to my clients that way. And when I come in the house and I walk into chaos, and I don't mean like busy energy. I mean, when everybody has just dumped all their crap at the front door, I need to just have a little bit of a runway after a really long day to get 5 minutes to decompress. And when I walk in to everybody's crap, it just is like overwhelming me.
For sure.
You guys heard that? If you're listening.
If you come to my house, don't just dump it all inside the front door.
Jen, it's been a pleasure having you on today. Thank you so much for really sharing your depth and your specialization, how you add value to the world, and who you being a hero to. Let us know that you're out there doing great work. So appreciate you showing up today.
Thank you.
Any last word?
Just how much I really appreciate what you're putting out into the world. I love the different subjects each day. And I think that our world is a better place. We're better, healthier humans, the more we expand our perspective. And I love your approach to this because it does nothing but help us shift our perspective to, be much broader and look at things differently. That's a gift. So thank you.
And I would say with that, thank you so much for saying that. And you are a perfect candidate for my podcast because this is an emotional podcast. We're big on emotion here, so but thank you so much for sharing. Any last word, Live?
Thank you very much, Jen, Asher. This was awesome, and I hope we helped a lot of parents out there to understand better how to approach the relationship with their teens.
I hope so.
With that, folks, you tune into Pandora's Awareness Podcast, a place where we collect stories and circulate life-changing wisdom. And today you got some wisdom from Jen and you got some curiosity from Lav. So hope you, with those two